in this section, we're going to be going through understanding how designing responsive interface work, right? But let's just come to a very, very rudimental level. What are responsive design, and why do we do responsive design? So responsive design is the approach of designing applications whereby on several or multiple devices you can access the application seamlessly, right? So when you go to a website now, and let's say you go to jumia.com and you're trying to buy something on Jumia, and then at some point you decide to change to a mobile device, you should still be able to access Jumia in a way that it is not. What I mean by that is the experience that you felt when you're using Jumia on your laptop, you should still be able to feel that same experience when you're using it on your mobile device, right? So that is the idea of responsive interface. It is the idea that no matter the device you're interacting with, you are still able to interact. You are still able to interact with the application seamlessly, and you're not feeling like something is lost when you're interacting with this application, right? That is the layman understanding. That's layman definition of what a responsive interface is. So the goal of this session is so that by the end of this session, you should be able to accomplish something like what I've done here. So if you adjust this design, you would notice that it is scaling down depending on the viewport I've set. And I'm going to show everybody how I accomplish this, so it doesn't seem like a foreign thing. It's very, very simple. So the more I adjust it, the more it scales down. And this is something we're going to do before the time runs out. All right. So there's some few stuff you need to understand about responsive interface. And one of the things that we need to understand is how grids work. Because a lot of times when you speak to a developer, when you're interacting with a developer, there are terms that they use, there are terminologies that they use when communicating. And a lot of times when you're designing website, you also have to employ those terminologies when you're designing, because if you don't understand those terminologies, you'll be creating applications that developers cannot implement, and users as well will find it very, very difficult to use. So it is very important. And now one of those terms is called grid. So grid is very, very common when you're speaking to developers, like understanding the grids of your web devices, or understanding the grids of your mobile devices, right? And the reason why grid is very, very important is because it guides you. There are certain rules that it allows you to work with, such that you can't miss it. And let me show you an article by Material Design, so that you can see what grids are basically. So if you go to material, I'm going to share the link to this particular documentation so that we can see it by ourselves. So if you see grids, so we have different grids for different devices. When we're interacting with web devices, when we're interacting with mobile devices, when we're interacting with tablet devices, there are grids for each and every one of them. And that is how, because right now the majority of devices that people use today, a lot of devices that we all use is whether we're using often interacting on a mobile app, depending on the country, really. If you're interacting if you speak to someone from China, a lot of times they use their mobile app to use the applications, right? And then it just depends on the demographics. But you need to understand that when I'm designing when you're designing applications or websites or interfaces, you need to account that there are users that will be using interfaces that are that's still not within the conventional viewports that we'd expect. Because if you can remember recently, the Apple Vision Pro was launched, right? How do you design for that? There are grids as well that have been created for having Apple Vision Pro. So in order for you to design for web, for mobile, for desktop, for tablets rather, you need to understand these grids and why these grids are set. So one of the things we'll be talking about when we're talking about grids, there are three things majorly. It is the columns, it is the gutters, and it is the margin. To explain it very simply, columns are basically the let's say the horizontal spacing, the horizontal area in which you can place elements. Let me use this as an example. If you see the way these boxes are placed, they're placed in a column like this box are occupying two columns each. So a lot of times when you're designing, you design in columns, sometimes in rows. But columns is not even the major one. The two major ones are the gutter and the margin. So the gutter is basically the space in between columns, right? And the margin is the space outside of the like external to the element itself, which is the spacing between the element and then the body of the interface. So these are the three major terms you'll be interacting with when you are designing responsive interface and when you're talking about grids generally. So for this is a, I think this is a tablet looking at the size right now. For when you're interacting with mobile devices, oftentimes you'll be dealing with 4 grid column. You'll be dealing with 4 grid column. I think the question that will come up is why, what determines the column that we are working with on these devices? And let me show you a practical example of why these columns are very, very important. So for tablet, we use 8 columns. For desktop, we use about 12 in total. So let me show you what determines the columns that we use on these different devices. Let me show you a practical example. So I'm going to whip up a frame, right? I'm going to choose this desktop. Now let me just do the grids that I spoke about. So desktop, when you're working on desktop, a lot of time the convention, this cannot be missed. The convention, like a lot of times as designers, we have to follow conventions, because the moment you start deviating for conventions, we can't really explain the thought process to developers, because developers are used to certain rules and languages that they work with. So the moment it is good to explore, it is very, very good to explore, but there's some fundamentals that you just do try to break. Just leave it where it is sometimes, or except you've gotten to a level where you can now decide, okay, this is the column I would like to use, or this is a different column I would like to use. It's always better to stick to the convention that has been set, or the rules or the guidelines that has been set. So let me create a I'm sorry, I'm not used to this new UI. Let me switch back. So let me create a grid. I'm going to change this to row. So this is basically how we create grids, right? I'm going to change this to column, and I'm going to change this to 12. So like I explained earlier about grids, we have on this grid panel, we have margin, which was discussed as the external spacing of an element towards the box of the interface, and then the quarter, which is the inline spacing, which is the padding. It's also known as padding, to be honest. I call it padding sometimes. So let me change this to 24, and let me change it to 20. Now, depending on the kind of design you're working on, whether you're working on a website, whether you're working on a dashboard, that will determine the amount of margin you give it. But it is always advisable to stick with 12 when you're working on a website. And let me show you an example of why that is always advisable. Now, when you're designing interfaces, there are several ways you can place on your interface. So it's either you place it at like 2 elements occupying the same equal space, like filled with 2 elements occupying the same equal space, or you're placing it by 4 rows, right? So there are different possible ways you can do so, and this grid helps you guide how you place them equally and not just miss it. So this grid helps a lot to just guide it. So if you're finding it difficult to equally space the element, this grid can guide you on how you space it. That's one of the use cases, the minor use case, to be honest. But now, and there are different ways. So you could place it like this. You could also increase it by even bringing it down, by placing them at a 4x3 column. So this grid just helps you manage it. But there's a distance you cannot go beneath. There's a distance you cannot go beneath. The moment you start designing at 1 column, it becomes difficult for users to use. For users to even, if let's imagine you have a text in this particular column, right? Let's create this text. This is a very slim text. Now, oftentimes for web, I would most likely use, let me just choose 16. Oh, okay, let me just change this manually. 16 by 24. So now imagine that your text is occupying this column. This is often very difficult to read. So when you're working with interfaces, it is always good to follow grids, and don't try to follow the lowest grids that you can follow, because there's some grids that you do that it will just be too small to interact with. So oftentimes what I would personally advise, or what I personally do, because this is my process All the explanation I'm giving so far is how I will do it when I'm designing, right? This is how I'll do it, and this is how it has worked for me over time. So it's always time, every time I always advise that you use at least two column. If you are going to do anything, if you are going to do an interface that is going to be used by users, you shouldn't go below this two column grid, which is about 333. Often I don't try to go below it, because the moment I start going lower than it becomes difficult for users to read. So a lot of times I would oftentimes design within four by four, or four columns rather, or even three columns. I don't try to go even these two. To me personally, it's actually very small, but there are a lot of people that can actually still work with it depending on the kind of information they're trying to show. I just wanted to explain what these grids are, and how it would eventually relate to what this topic is about, which is designing responsive interfaces. So this is for a desktop grid. We also have for tablets, and I'm really happy that Figma has done a feature where you can easily just pick these different devices. I can't imagine trying to find the exact frame to use for a tablet. So oftentimes I just come to what Figma has done, and then I choose the size I want to use, honestly. So this is for tablet, and then we also have for mobile. So in this session, we're going to be designing for tablet and mobile, just to see how responsive interface works. So let me change this to the mobile. All right. Okay. So oftentimes when you're working on a desktop, you would most likely work with a 12 column. That's just conversion. When you're working on a tablet, you would oftentimes work with an 8 pixel, or 8 column rather, 8 column. And then when you're working for mobile, you'd often work with a 4 column. So that is just the rule. I'm not going to state the rule, to be honest. That particular one, that's something I cannot change. And that's something that has worked for a lot of people. And that's why it is now a guideline that every designer should follow. And every developer also use in times that they need to use it. So now that's the side of that's a part of the guideline. Now there's a next guideline that we also employ when you're designing for different interfaces, right? And that guideline is usually the margin of your interfaces. When you're working on mobile devices, there's a margin that you should use, at least the lowest you can go. There's a certain margin for that. When you're working on tablet, there's a certain margin for that. And what I mean by margin is the spacing between the element and the edge of the interface. Just to reiterate on that. So there's a certain margin you need to use. That's now oftentimes when I'm designing for desktop, a lot of times when I'm designing, I would usually go with 100, because that's like the standardized number that a lot of people use. I usually go for 100. Let me change this to 100 margin. I also go with 100 because that's a standardized number, right? It is easy. The reason why it is 100 for me is because it is easier to interact with when you're dealing with an interface. Let me just hide this bar. When you're dealing with an interface, let's say this is the interface you're dealing with now. It is easier for me to click within this area, right? Rather than me trying to target the edge of the box, the edge of the interface. When you're designing, like a lot of times, it's always easier to interact with elements that is right in front of you. So that is why I would most likely use 100, or that's why the 100 is usually like the standardized number you use for your desktop, right? A lot of times I go beyond that. Sometimes I decide to use 120. Sometimes I even go as far as 240, depending on the interface I'm dealing with. I worked on a design recently that I used, I think about 280, just because it was very, very important for me to use 280, because that interface was not the kind of interface that just stays in one position like this. If I open a sidebar, this interface moves towards the, let me see, it moves towards the left like this. I don't know how to do it. But this interface, the moment I move the sidebar I have in that particular design, at the moment I click on it, this whole interface shifts towards this angle. So I needed more space on this side. That's why I gave it more, like I gave it more padding, so that the moment it adjusts to this left, I have enough space to work with for the sidebar. So that's a case where I used more than the normal convention. But a lot of times I try to just stick with 100, within the 100 range, just to keep it safe for everyone and for every interface that they would like to do, whether they're dealing with a very wide interface or a very slim desktop. Because even when you're designing for desktop, there are still ranges within desktop that could be wider than normal sizes of desktop, like 16-inch, 15 inch, 14 inch, 13 inch. So it just depends on the desktop you're using. So a lot of times for that is it for desktop. For tablets, a lot of times it's recommended that you use 40 for the margin. It's recommended that you use 40 for the margin. Sometimes you use 32, sometimes you use 40. But a lot of times I just stay with 40 because the reason why we're giving the margin so that we can have enough space from the edge of the screen so that we don't try to be targeting this area. It is more easier for us to target the area that we can target with rather than try to put elements in this corner. So what I'm trying to say is that it is advisable that if you are putting any element on your interface, just make sure it is within this area because it is more clickable rather than putting it at the edge of the screen, which makes it difficult for users. Imagine trying to touch your phone and then try to touch close to it. Before you know, you touch the new feature that Apple just launched out with that side stuff that open your camera. So it's just trying to target that edge is really, really difficult. So it's oftentimes advisable that you design within this area. And then for your mobile, it is advisable that you use 16. The lowest you can go is 16. Don't try to go lower than that. And a lot of times the highest I go for, I use 16 as my lowest. The highest I go for, I use 24. I just there's really no like magic I'll be doing because unlike web, there's really no magic I need to be doing for mobile because I need as much space as possible. On mobile, you're dealing with a very, very tight width. Like you have less space compared to web. So you need to make sure that you have enough space, even enough space to interact with elements. So that is just my explanation on what Grid is about. So let's go to the actual responsive interface. So for this example, we're going to be using a design I did earlier this year, a old website I did earlier this year, and I'm going to be dropping the link to the full landing page. So if you want to practice with it yourself, you can go ahead and use it as well. So now the goal of this is for me to show you how you can convert this website or this web view to your tablet view to your mobile view. Right? A lot of people, I know a lot of people that use mobile first approach. That is a very, very awesome approach. But personally, I just don't feel the comfortability with that. And that's why I often design web first. But mobile first is the best approach you should follow as a designers that are designing for users with. If you're designing a product that has a lot of users that are using mobile devices, it's best way to go with mobile first approach. And a lot of times, me, I don't work with product that has consumers. I usually work with product that are B2B. So you are dealing with businesses, and businesses a lot of times interact on the web a lot of times. So I design for web first and before I start converting to mobile. So if you're designing consumer product like a fintech app, like an e-commerce app, like a food delivery app, rather, you need to design mobile first so that because the users that are going to be using this particular app would most likely interact with it from a mobile device. Right, so let's go ahead with the actual design. I'm going to select a tablet because that's what I have to convert it to first. I'm going to select a tablet and I'm going to, but before I do that, let's learn something very interesting, which is very, very important. Let me see if this has been applied yet. Okay, great. So when you're dealing with developers or when you're dealing with a responsive interface or a website that's very responsive, so there's some things you would do. You would oftentimes go to the web app. Let me open a particular web app, for example. Let me just hope this is responsive. Let's use this. Let's use this guy as an example. I just want to use this as an example just to tell you. So a lot of times, when I have to check whether this particular website is responsive, what I do is I just come and I start adjusting like this, just to see whether it's responsive. And obviously, this is responsive. So I want us to be able to do the same thing. The same way we're checking it this way. I want us to be able to do that same thing in Figma, which is what I showed you here. That was what I showed you. And this was done with the plugin. I'm going to tell you what the name of the plugin is as soon as we get to that section. All right. So one thing I want for this particular interface is that when I move it around, you can see right now the element within this interface is not moving along with what I'm doing. I'm trying to adjust this towards the left and towards the right, and it's not adjust. Personally, what I want is that this should be responsive as I'm adjusting that, not just staying in a fixed position. Now, to do what I'm trying to do now, a lot of times we would use something called the constraint. The constraint is a feature that allows you to place elements and align them to and like attach them to a certain point in your design, so that when you move things around, it moves based off of that constraint that you've set on that particular element. And right now I'm using auto layout short in this design. I'm using auto layout, even except on the main frame, right? In this header is an auto layout. This side is also an auto layout. This is a shape. This is a vector, which I drew from scratch. And then the background is basically an image. So now for this, let's start with this particular vector now. When you click on the vector on the right panel, which is this properties panel, you can see something called the constraint. And now for this constraint, you can set it this is the first one is the horizontal constraint, and then the other one is the vertical constraint. Now for the horizontal constraint, you can see stuff like the left, and right, center, scale. I'm going to explain what each and every one of these means, so we can understand why we're using it and the difference between them. And then the same thing for the vertical constraint. We have something similar, but the only difference is that it's top and bottom, center, and scale. So now let's test this first constraint, which is left. So the moment I adjust this, you notice that nothing is happening. The reason why nothing is happening is because the constraint of this particular element is towards the left. That means it is attached towards this left. It can't leave the left hand side. Let me show you how it actually works. So the moment I drag this side and I try to move from here, you notice that this is also staying at the left, because the constraint set on this is towards the left. Let me show you how it would be if it was set towards the right. So I've set the constraint of this particular shape towards the right, and I'm going to adjust it. Now, do you notice this? You can see because of the constraint now, it is this particular element is leaning towards the right of the frame, right? That is the major difference between left and right. It's just the way it is anchoring towards. That's what the constraint is trying to do. It's anchoring into a particular side. Now let's change this constraint, because what I actually want, I don't want it to move towards the right. To be honest, I don't want it to move like this. I want it such that when I adjust it, it expands instead of moving. Like it still retains itself at this point. Like the left side of this still retains itself here, and then the right side as well also still expands. So to do that, you can just easily do that with this left and right feature. So what this left and right feature is saying is that you are anchoring this particular element at the left side and also at the right side. I'm going these details because I was told that a lot of beginners are in this session, so that's why I'm trying to explain this as much as I can. So I'm going to anchor it to left and right. So the moment I drag this now, you notice now it is anchoring towards the left and right. Regardless of how much I drag it, it's still going to anchor towards the left and right. So that's basically what the left and right constraint does for this particular vector. And let me just for showing sake, let me just show you the other constraint. We have the center constraint. So what the center constraint does is that when you try to adjust the parent of this particular object, this object stays in the center of the screen. Now let's see what that shows. What that looks like. Can you see it? This point now is it's not expanding. It's just trying to retain itself at the center of the screen. That's what it's trying to do. And then the last one for this particular constraint is a scale. So basically, just like the word says, it's just going to scale, right? This is scaling, but the tight difference, it is scaling, but there's a little difference. But let's leave that difference for now. But for this session, we would be using left and right, because that's exactly what we need. We don't really need to use the scale. Okay, so that we've done what we need for this particular section. Now let's look at this section, this top navigation. As I'm adjusting it, I notice that this top navigation is still retaining itself at the point, and I need it to expand. So obviously, I will change the constraints of this top navigation. First of all, let me remove this from an auto layout. I don't want it to be an auto layout. Auto layout can achieve what I'm trying to do, but I'm just trying to not use an auto layout. Okay, I see. Let's use the auto layout either way. It's going to be fine. So what I just have to do is, the first thing I want to do is, there's an auto layout holding this text and the image with the top navigation, right? So if I want that, when I adjust the main frame, the main interface, I want this auto layout to adjust with it. I don't want it to stay in the same place. So I will do the same thing. I'll apply left and right to this particular auto layout as a constraint. Apply left and right. So the moment I apply it and I adjust this interface, you can see that this is now adjusting. Even the backgrounds are not adjusting. This is why the image is adjusting, is because the image was applied to the auto layout itself rather than being an image. It was applied to this particular element. So that's how you can see the image adjusting. So let's return it back. Now that is done. What I actually want to do is I want to make this element adjust with it. Right now, this element is in an auto layout, so it's in an auto layout. So the spacing between this element is displayed at an auto. Okay, let me just explain what this auto layout is, so I can move from that. So in auto layouts, there are two kind of spacing, and it's related. When you interact with the developer, there's also a terminology that they use. So in this auto layout now, let me just change to the default behavior. Let me see. Okay, yes. So the default behavior of an auto layout is that it has a value. So this value is basically the gap between the elements. I don't want to go that deep into the actual definition of an auto layout, but I'm just trying to show you how this particular thing works and how it relates to what I'm about to do. So auto layouts, when you're working at auto layout, there are three things or two things majorly that you are working with. Okay, let's say three things. So the first thing you're working with is the direction of the auto layout. So what the direction basically means is how the elements in the auto layout will be placed next to each other. Right now, the direction of this auto layout is an horizontal layout. We also have a vertical layout. So now this element, this is the navigation placed vertically, and the reason why it is placed this much between them is because of the horizontal gap. I don't call it horizontal gap. What I personally call it, I call it a padding. It is easier for me to think about it that way, because as a developer, I've always been working with padding. So when I came to design, it is usually very difficult for me to change that time. I'm still working padding and margin. It's easier for me to just work with. So let me just reduce this padding to 24 so I can see them very close to each other. So the direction is basically vertical, horizontal, and then we have this new feature that Figma just introduced very, very recently. I think it was earlier this year. We have the wrap. Right now, we don't need to discuss about the wrap. What we're interested in is the vertical and horizontal for this session. In the future, we could possibly explore what that is and how we can actually use it. Okay. So I want this to be in an horizontal layout because these elements should be side by side. This is an application. Now, like I said, this is the horizontal. This padding here is horizontal spacing between the logo, the navigation items, and then the call to actions. Right? The call to action are basically the buttons. Yeah, the part that requires action. Those are what are called call to actions. All right. So then the last one we also interact with is basically the so this is the gap and this is the okay, let me not mix the term. This is also a padding. Just like this is called padding, this is also a padding, but the difference between the two padding is that this is towards the element, it's towards the container rather, not the element. This padding is towards the element, this gap here is towards the element, while this one is towards the container. So I'm going to and for this padding, we have the horizontal padding and then we have the vertical padding. The horizontal padding is basically the left and right padding. So the spaces that you can see here and here is basically caused by this horizontal padding. The spaces you can see at the top here and here is caused by the vertical padding. So that's basically the auto layout. And then when you're dealing with the gap or the padding between elements in a particular auto layout, there are two ways you can work with them. Either you work with them as a fixed value, or you work with them as an auto value. An auto value is also called flex in development. So an auto value is basically just spreading it around, flex space between basically just spreading the element around. That's what auto value does. When you put the auto value, it spreads this element around. There are shortcuts I use a lot of times when I'm interacting with this. Sometimes I'll just press the. Sometimes I'll just press A. Right. The moment I press A, it changes it to auto. Or sometimes I just double tap on this point and it changes it to auto. So, all right. So that's it about the auto layout. Now, what the exact thing auto accomplishes basically the adjustment of this. So I want this element to adjust with this, because now the parent of this navigation is already adjusting, but the child is not adjusting. So to do that, it's basically the same thing as we've done for the rest of them. Let me just remove some auto layout because I don't need it, honestly. So to do that is basically to touch on this child and change the constraint to left and right. This is why I removed it from an auto layout, is because I can't work with constraints if the element I'm working is within an auto layout. So there are two ways you can actually do it. Is that you use an auto layout and you treat it differently. Let me show you if I'm going to be using an auto layout. But let me show you how this works now. Let me just expand and see that, be sure that this is working. So the left and right is working. And let me show you the other way I could have done it if I was using an auto layout. If I was using an auto layout and the parent is already few, the parent is already constrained to the left and right, what I can do is I can come to this child, and instead of the width to be fixed here, right, I'll change the width to be few. So the field containers, let me just explain these three concepts. So we have the fixed width, we have the all content, and then we have the field container. Fixed width is basically having a very strict value. This is 1440, which is basically the width of this, right? If I adjust it off, it's having a fixed value of 1029. So this is the fixed value. That means no matter what happens to this particular element, it won't change unless I change it by myself. That is a fix. Even if I decide to increase this word here or make it very long, the fixed value, the width of this particular number would not change. Now, for org, what org basically means is when you set this to org, what it allows the container to occupy the exact amount of the element that is within it. So depending on the amount of element you have if you have this much element, you see that the size of the parent would increase with it. So it is basically orging it. So if the child goes smaller, the size of the parent also goes smaller. So yeah, that's the org. And then the field is basically saying this part. What the field is doing is that this parent element to this element is a child element to this area section auto layout. So the moment I set it to fill, it is occupying the space that the parent of this particular navigation is occupying. So it's just filling what the parent has. If I set that same thing to this particular element, this particular group, this TTS, if I set it to fill as well, you can see the width is occupying what the parent has left, which is this space, this empty space. The width of this particular city is now occupying that much width. That's what fill is. You're just trying to fill the space that remains. It's filling the space that remains, just making everything tight. All right, so let me just change this back to space between, or auto rather. So now this is still an auto layout. Let's see how it works when we now adjust it. You can see it's doing the same work as when I set the constraint to left and right. It's still doing the same thing. So whether I use an auto layout or you use the constraint, auto layout has made things very easy for us. But it is now left to you as a designer to decide, okay, I don't want to use an auto layout. I want to use a constraint by myself. So all these things that I've done, I could have just easily did it rather. English is difficult. I could have just easily did it with auto layout, and I would not have any stress. But I'm just trying to explain constraint because you, at some point, you would be required to use it. You just have to. You don't have any choice. You can't escape it. You just have to use it. So let's now deal with this child, because now everything is expanding except this image. This image is just staying fixed. So we need to fix this image as well. So for this image, we can do the same thing. We can align it to the Now, I would have loved to just throw some questions out, but I don't think we have that much time for me to throw questions out. So for this image, you can align it to the right, right? You can align it to the right, and then when I align it to the right, notice that the moment I start adjusting it, okay, this is not adjusting. The reason why this is not adjusting is very, very simple. It is because the parent element of this image is occupying a fixed width. So, like I said, no matter how much something happens to the parent element or the child element, it's not going to change the width of this particular auto layer that is fixed. So let's change it to fill instead. So the moment I change it to fill now and ensure that this particular image is constrained towards the right, I can now adjust it myself. And you see, this is now moving. This is moving however I want it to move. This is basically what I want when I'm like working with a responsive website, such that I can adjust it myself and it is adjusting effectively. But this is not the essence of the responsive website, of responsive design rather. Responsive design such that when you design an interface, you're able to design for both web, tablet, mobile, designing for multiple interfaces. So I'm going to go ahead and bring out to convert this design to a tablet alternative and also a mobile alternative. So let's go ahead and bring it in our tablet. Let's use 844. I think 744 is a little small in the margin. All right. So I'm going to adjust the height to match this. So what I can basically do, a lot of times I've seen people just when they're dealing with responsive website, what they just do is they come and copy this element, paste it here, and then somehow they scale it, like in a way, just scale it down, and it looks very awkward. It just looks very awkward because I've actually seen it. That's why I'm saying it. So it's not advisable for you to do responsive website that way. Scaling down or scaling your element down, or just randomly adjusting it's going to cause you to lose the experience that people get on the web. And when you do that thing for the mobile, you just lose the experience basically. People just feel like this. I'm not comfortable with this particular interface. That's what people will feel. So what I've done here is fine, which is copying this interface. But what I can now start doing is I don't need to use I don't need to, I can just adjust it naturally first. Let's just take it one step at a time. Adjust it naturally. Now, you remember that we talked about grids when I was explaining earlier. So I'm going to bring in my grid just to make sure that I'm using the right grid for this particular. Let me switch off this grid. I think there's a grid here. Here as well. So I'm going to change this grid to column. And then I'm going to change it to 8, like we mentioned earlier. So I'll change this to 40. And I think the rest is fine. Basically 8 and 40. That's what I changed. Now I need to make sure that this is occupying that area. I need to make sure that this thing the logo is staying at this point, not at this point awkwardly. So I'm going to change this to 40. Then this address is also occupying the 40, right? That's basically the external padding towards the horizontal side. And then this now, I'll change this to 40 as well. So now this element is staying at this edge. And then we can also scale this down. You can just adjust this down manually. We don't need to do much. The image is fine. Adjusting the image until you are satisfied visually is always advisable. Once you think that this is okay for the image, right now this is not okay, but I'm just trying to adjust things as it goes. So a lot of times you'll be doing this one step at a time. That was why when I first started designing to do my responsive interface was very, very difficult, because I'll be like, I've done the web view, and then I have to do mobile view. And sometimes your website can be very, very long. You have to do mobile view, you have to do text, tablet view. Like you're doing a lot of views. But the more you do it, that's the funny thing. The more you do it, the more easier, the more fun it just becomes. You don't find it stressful again. It's when you're just starting, you find it very, very stressful. You find it very, very tedious to do. You'd be like, okay, let me just leave this to the developer to do the mobile responsiveness by himself. But newsflash, if you just decide to leave it to the developer, and your developer now churns out a mobile responsive interface that doesn't look great on mobile, you'll be the one to be blamed at the end of the day. or you, because that it's going to be your design that will be showing, your design will be showing to the world. And when they interact with your design on mobile, they're just losing the experience and they'll be like, what's going on? What's going on? So I did it once. That actually happened to me like 2 years ago when I worked on a product. I only did web, and then I left the team. When it was time, when the product launched, and then I went to check it on the mobile view, I realized that the mobile view was shit. It was terrible. It wasn't something I could just write home about. It wasn't something I could just speak about because I did not design it. So obviously, when they ask now, what's up with the mobile view, I'll be like, I didn't design it, but I should have designed it. So that's what I'm trying to say. You need to do this yourself. You need to do this. You have to go through this process of creating a mobile responsiveness. So now, okay, that's that. Next thing we need to start working on is the text, reducing the size of the text, and basically what you can reduce. I read a book. I read a book in 2022, and that was the very first design book I read. The book is called Refactoring UI, and I believe a lot of us, some of us, if not all, have read that book, Refactoring UI. That book was very, very interesting. Like, it was very, very engaging. I read it and I was like, I'm going to start reading design books. I wasn't the kind of person that loved reading design books. I enjoyed watching the tutorial videos, right? When I first started, I enjoyed watching tutorial. I can watch tutorial videos, but the problem is I wasn't practicing enough. But I was watching it. At some point, I dropped it, but I preferred tutorial videos. So when I got that book, when I read the book, a lot of people recommended it to me. So I read the book. When I read the book, I was like, there were a lot of wisdom in that book that just made me want to keep reading design books. So my take from that is, if you have not started reading design books, please just try. You cannot start with refactoring UI, and then just let me know how it goes. Start with refactoring UI and just let's see how it goes. Because that was the first book that changed my trajectory of the way I design. There's a lot of insight today. One of the things that was mentioned from that book was that that's in relation to responsive design. One of the things that was mentioned in that book is that the header of your element would always scale down faster than your mobile counterpart, sorry, than the sub-header counterpart. So what I'm trying to say is that the header, which is this big text, would scale down faster than this when you're dealing with a responsive interface. So what that is that right now the header is 64. If I'm going to make it be responsive for a tablet or an iPad, I have to scale it down faster than this mobile, than this sub-header rather. So what I'll do is, a lot of time I'll use 48 as my header on a tablet, right? And then let's change the line height. I'm going to change to let's see, 56. All right. So there's a calculation I do for this line height. There's a calculation. It's a very, very simple calculation. When you're working in line height is very, very important when you're designing. It determines the legibility of your content, the content of your interface. So the simple calculation I do, which everybody you can just know that even because it's just very simple. Anytime I'm working with the text, I make sure it is having an increment of 8, for a visible text, right? So if I'm dealing with a size of 16, how could 24? If I'm dealing with a size of, this is very small, but if I'm dealing with a size of 24, I work with 32. If I'm dealing with the size of 40, I work with 48. If I'm dealing, that's it is still legible at this point. Like, you can easily read it. If I'm dealing with the size of 48, I work with 56, which is still legible. I can try to adjust it towards like this or anyhow I want it to be, but it's still legible at the end of the day. Let me remove the grid. First of all, I think this has accessibility problem. Okay, let me just leave it for now. Okay, so you got now the difference between the original size of this header was, I think, 64 or 64. Now it is 48. If you look at 64 minus 48, that's basically about 16. I think it was 16. 64 minus 48, basically 16 was difference. But now the sub header would not scale as much as the header. This sub header would oftentimes go to the size of 16, and then this will be changed to 24, right? So this one looks great for for a tablet. It doesn't look too big, and it just looks like it's right for the viewport that is interacting with. So there's some size of element that you use for a particular viewport. Someone that will look at it will be like, this does not look right. This shouldn't be on this interface. This is too big, or this is too small, right? On web, it is always advisable that you don't go below 16 for legibility purpose. You don't go below 16. Like 16 should be the lowest size of text that you should use. It's advisable because when people are editing it, you're dealing with a very big screen. And when you start working with 12, when you start working with 10, you're making it very difficult for people that have eye issues to look at, to consume the content that you've written. Okay, so let me just adjust this placement to make it feel more comfortable. I'm going to change it to 40. Yeah, let's take it up more. Take the space. I can still bring it up more. Okay, so now I can just decide to scale this as much as I want to, the one that feels most comfortable to me. Okay, I'm just bring it up as well. Now I can also bring, so it's basically just adjusting the vectors are fine. I can adjust it however I want, right? I can adjust however I want, depending on what I want, depending on how I want it to look. At this point, it's just left to me to adjust it. So let me just adjust this however I want. Adjust this however I want. Let me just leave this space here. Let me leave it. So you can see that this looks right for a tablet counterpart. And then this, for me right now, this vision looks a little packed. It looks packed a little, right? Because you can't tell the difference between the call to action and the navigation because they're close to each other. So what I will do a lot of times, I'll just go ahead and put an hamburger instead. Just have an hamburger instead of just trying to pack it here. I'll put this in an hamburger and then I'll be fine. Right. So this hamburger, when they click on it, you expect that a drop down of the navigation and the call to action should show. So that's what this is what I would often time do when I'm dealing with a tablet. Now let's speed to the mobile since we have like about 30 minutes left. So for the mobile, okay.
What
For
time
the
are they
mobile,
starting tomorrow? Oh, they go for wedding.
sorry, please can you mute your mic?
Oh, okay.
Okay, now for the mobile, let's do the mobile. Just like I mentioned, the grid I'm going to be using for this mobile is going to be 4, which is the column, 4 columns. I'm going to be using 4 columns, and I'm going to be using 24 just to be comfortable. Use 24. Just like what I did for the tablet, I'm going to do the same for the mobile. I'm going to adjust this to 24. I'm going to manually adjust this, which looks awkward right now. I'm going to change this to the hamburger, and I'm going to delete this. So the hamburger is here right now. And then I'm going to scale this down because it looks very big right now. I'm going to reduce the space of this particular one to 24. Just making sure that everything is aligning to the grid I have set. So I'm going to change this now. Like I said, just like I said, from what I got from Refractory UI, your header would always scale faster than your body text or your sub header. So I'm going to scale this down to 40. And my calculation from 40 to 48 is it's different. So I'm going to use 48 as the line height. Let me not adjust this. Let me adjust this instead. And then I'm going to let this one have a fill width. This one as well should have a fill width. So it's just the fill is basically to occupy the area I've set for the parent. It's the same thing with this. Have a fill width. I can also change this to 16, the sub header to 16, and I make this 24. All right, and then I can adjust this up finally. Let's adjust this up. Why is it not adjusting? Let me see. Okay, yeah, I guess that's the problem. Yes, I've even done the same thing for tablets. But it's fine, it's fine. All right. So now this, instead of it staying by the right side or something, I can just bring it to the center. I can bring it to the center. You can see adjust it more, to be honest. I bring it to the center like this, and then the vector. Let's hide the grid. The vector. Yeah, am I missing the vector? I think so. Let's copy the vector. Then I can just adjust it to match the width, and then I can align it towards the bottom. Right now it's looking abnormal, but let's I guess the way I adjusted it was awkward. Let's adjust it naturally. Then bring it down. We'll still take care of how this is very rounded compared to the web, so it can maintain that experience. Let's adjust this down a bit. So for the roundness, we can just edit this shape. You can when you double tap on this shape, you go to edit mode, or you press enter. If you press enter as well, you go to edit mode, and then you can select this point and you reduce the curve or the corner to 40. Let's go to reduce it 40, reduce this to 40, and reduce this to 40. I'll do the same thing for this one as well. I'm going to leave edit mode, and then I'll enter edit mode for this one. I'll change it to 40. I think I can go to 24 to be honest. Let's go to 24. Okay, then this looks a little too high. I can just bring it down a bit. I can just take it up. Let's bring the scale of this down a little. Take it up. It's just at this point I'm just trying to eyeball it to make sure I'm using the right size. Let me take this down. Not sure why. Let me see. Euro section. Okay. Let's take this up. Normally I would have more time to fix this, but let's just leave it as it's. It looks a little different. Let's adjust this like this, and then do the same thing for this tag. So 3 on this. I'm just basically selecting the point. I'm moving it to my arrow key. Move it to my arrow key by and holding shift as well. So I'll do the same thing for this top. All right. So it looks more natural at this point. So what do I want to mention? There's something I wanted to mention now. Mm, mm. Okay. So one last thing before we decide to go to of expanding ourselves is to test that these guys are actually still responsive. We tested that this is responsive, right? Where we could adjust and things are moving around. We should be able to do the same thing for these guys as well. That we adjust. Next, this is already moving around, so there's no problem. I really don't have problem with this. It's already moving around because of what I said something here and I copied it to this place. So I guess I don't need to do it again. Well, you could also see you could still go more towards it, but let's just leave it like this for now. And then the mobile, we can also try to adjust and see how it works. So this is not what I want for the mobile. This is not what I want. What I want is that when I adjust this, the text adjusts with it, right? It adjusts with it. It's not just staying fixed like this. So what
Yeah.
I'm going to do is for this particular element, I'm going to set for the auto layout holding
As soon as
the
I did
text.
one itself. So this
I'm
was
going to
saying
change
so
the view,
that's coming.
right? The moment I change the view, you can notice how it adjusted by itself. So I'm going to change the view. Let me just scale this back up again. All right. So that's one. So the moment I adjust this now, I hope it's adjusting now. At this point now, you can see everything is adjusting with it. And this is exactly what I want. So now I can certify that these three guys are responsive. Now let's do what we wanted to do, which is coming to implement this. So the plugin I used to achieve this feature or to achieve this responsive um, look is called Breakpoint. 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 So the plugin I use to show how the devices will look at the different breakpoints. So this is not something you will do every single time when you're working on a project. It's just something you can just do if you have time for it. But it's not something you must do. It's not a must. It's just something fun to do. To be honest, it's something fun. It's not really strict or anything. To be honest, I never did this up until when I was going to be taking this session. I never used this plugin. I just decided let's just see how plugin works. Because I've always been seeing the plugin, I've always been seeing tutorials, I've always been seeing different guys just showing tutorials about it. I just had to try it when I had of this session I was going to load in. So let's go ahead and run this plugin. So we have breakpoints here. You can just go ahead and search for it from this point here. Just search for breakpoints. And then you can run it. And obviously it's not free. I think that was one of the reasons why I decided not to use it. It's not free. So I can just continue. And it's good for me, it's going to be expiring in the next 10 days. If you decide to use it, I think it should be about 15 days or so. You should wait to use it for about 15 days for free before you can now be mandated to pay for it. So, like I said, it's not something you need to use. It's just something you can just try. Just try it. So now for this to achieve this, we need to create a new adaptive layout. So I can create a new adaptive layout, which is basically this. This is where the adjustment will be happening. So for the adaptive layout, we have different breakpoints. So these are breakpoints. These are basically breakpoints, right? We have the 320, we have the 600. And we can add more because we're dealing with three views. So we can add two more. So we can have three views so that we can add interfaces to. So now let's adjust this breakpoint so that we can match what we've designed, which is the size of the screen of each and every one of the screens. So the highest breakpoint should be this. The highest breakpoint should be this, which is one. This should be 1440. Should be 1440. The highest breakpoint should be 1440. So let's continue. So for this should be 1440. And then when we click on this, we just select this. So we've selected this frame, and now it has been added to the breakpoint here. So we're not done yet. We need to do that for the rest of them. So we have this iPad Pro. So let us change. What's the size of this? This is 825. I think it was 830 something previously. Let's see. Yeah. I don't need the eye to be this. Oh shit. Okay. This let's change this. This should be 834. And then this 834 will be this. This, let's touch it. This will be this. I think I just want to be sure. And then last width which we should be working with is this other one. This is the wrong width. So I guess due to my adjustment, I've adjusted a lot. So let's work with this. It seems like okay. Let's work with this. To be honest, I don't want to stress it. So 459. Okay, 459, and this is this. I'm selecting it. This is this. Okay, so everything has been set, and then this is the last one. We are fine with this. So I just say this is the minimum size that we are designing for. This is the maximum size we are designing for. So now let's go ahead and test what we've done so far and see how it responds to this breakpoint. So the only way you can use this breakpoint plugin is where you've designed different views what to design for mobile, tablets, and web. So let's go ahead and start adjusting. I'm going to increase the height. Let's decrease the height by myself. Honestly, let's see the height I use there. This is 940. So let's try to maintain 940. All right. So let's start adjusting now and see how this is responding. So once I start adjusting, you can see now it's responding to what I defined. The moment it goes below 634, it is assuming it meets 634 rather, and it goes below it is assuming the tablet view. So the moment I go below that, below the 459, it's assuming the more view, and then upward to the end. So it's basically just now this is now fully responsive depending on the device we are working with. So I think we've come to the end of the session.
I think Joshua just sent me a question, and then I will just read that to you.
Okay.
When it comes to your line of work, how often do teams of designers and programmers communicate with each other?
Hmm. Okay. This is a question I get a lot of times. So like I said, I work in Remita, and a lot of times when we're working in a team, there are times when we reach out to developers, and there are times when we at some point we don't reach out to them. So in our company, we're a very large organization. We have like the department of designers, we have the department of developers. So when we're working on a product, for example, when we're working on a website, we oftentimes we would have met with the developers before we start a project, right? Just to speak together on what the deliverables are meant to deliver. So basically, I have meetings before we start the project rather, and then we discuss about the deliverables and what we want to work on, right? And what the developers' role would be in that particular project, right? And the tools, basically, the tools that they are meant to be using. So we interact with them before we start the project. During the project, when we're working on the project, when we're doing the designs, we don't interact with them as much as we do, as much as possible. But when we get to the end of the design, when we're done with the design and we're ready to hand that over to the developers, we we have to interact with developers more to walk them through the idea of what we came up with, and then understand if these developers can, if there's a constraint, if there's a technological constraint, or if there's time constraint for the developers to come up with the design, then we can come up with a compromise and say, okay, we did this way, but if it will take you this much time to accomplish this, let's bring in a more simpler approach to um to to this design, and so that you can implement it faster. So we oftentimes interact before we start the project. We interact when we're done in the project. We also interact at the third step, which is when we're doing a design QA. So design QA is basically when a developer has worked on a project and you're trying to make sure that the what was developed match what you design as a designer. So that's what the design QA is. So you're basically doing quality assurance for your for the app that you developed. So you don't be in a situation where you're getting what I ordered versus what I got. So you're making sure that what the developer has done is what you've designed. And if it is not what you designed, you need to point that out to the developers. Probably document it in a document and share that with the developers, or hold a meeting session with the developer and say, okay, these are the things I want to change. This doesn't match what I designed. In some cases, the implementation that the developer did could also be because there were some constraint of the technology they were using. Maybe a developer was using Tailwind, and there were some things that I did in the design and the developer wasn't able to accomplish in Tailwind. So there could be cases like that, and that at that point as well, I can still come to a compromise and say, okay, let's do it in this way, and then let's ship this out. Yeah, so those are the times where we interact with programmers or developers.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. There's another question here. It says, "What skill do I have to learn for product design?" That's coming from Abhishek.
Okay, okay. What skills? Personally, I would recommend. You know, the market is changing these days. The market is actually changing. Like there's a lot of pressure that's coming to develop to designers to start coding or designers to start doing product management. Like there's a lot of pressure these days on designers because they feel like AI is going to come and take our jobs. But what I would personally advise is learn your UI, your UX, your UI, your UX are the major skill you need to understand because just within UI and UX, there's a lot of things you need to learn. There's a lot. Learning about psychology, how human interact with product, learning about cognitive biases. Those are the Figma is a tool, right? Figma is not really a skill. It's basically a tool for executing the skills that you have, which is understanding of UI and understanding of the user experience, user interface and user experience. So understanding UI and UX that's the foundation of what you need to know, right? Those are the skills you need as a designer, as a product designer. But it gets to a level where you start to learn about strategy. But that it gets to a certain level when you have a lot of experience, you start to learn about strategy in design, right? You start to learn about illustration. So illustration is just another side. I, I'm that kind of designer that I love to create things by myself. I I create illustrations I use for my product. I create sometimes, but I'm not going to the point where I create icons by myself. But I create illustrations for my product, right? Because that's a skill I'm interested in acquiring. If you're interested in acquiring illustration skills, if that's what you think you need, because the moment when you acquire that skill, it elevates the way you think about design, right? There's always a difference between someone that can do illustration and someone that cannot do illustration because you would notice it with the way they use assets in design. So you can acquire illustration skills, but that depends on whether really have passion for it. So the reason why I'm doing illustration is because I have passion for it. For some other people, it's time wasting. Like it's waste. You have a timeline to design a product for 3 weeks. The product itself is very cumbersome, and then you have to start designing illustration for it. It can be very, very time wasting. But it's because I have passion for it. That's why I do illustration. So I wouldn't advise for it to take up illustration at this point if you are still a beginner. Try to master your UI and UX skills. But then from there, you can start branching out to illustration, to motion design, if you want. But it's not really compulsory for a product designer. It's just something that if you have passion for it, you do it. But if you don't, understanding UI and UX would save you a lot of times. It would save you from a lot of things. And then researching as well. Just to mention, understanding your research is very, very important. Just being able to ask questions, right? That is very important. Asking questions, communications, communicating in design is very, very important. I think those are the three major ones: UI, UX, and communication. Because you'd be required to communicate with people, with stakeholders, with management. You're required to communicate your ideas because when you're interacting with some people, a lot of stakeholders you interact with, they already have a preconceived notion of what they want. But in some cases, what they want may not be the best solution. So communication is where you can now translate your idea towards the stakeholder and say, okay, this is what I think it should be, because the users will find it this way to use it. They'll find it very easier to use compared to this way. So if you're able to communicate your answers very effectively, right, it will save you a lot of time. So UI, UX, and communication, that's the basic issue you have as a designer. That's it. Thank you.
And actually, you cannot leave out the part of communication in the whole design developer relationship or even design PM relationship.
Yeah.
So that's very, very, very important. Thank you, Daniel. Okay. I think that's the two we have, the two questions we had, and I would say that thank you, Daniel, for the session.